Welcome to Dark Loops Productions. Why is this so good? A podcast for discussing something we find in pop culture that really just wants us to ask and answer, why is this so good? I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University. And today we've come together to have our second discussion of the Netflix series, amazing manga, Alice in Borderland. Join me in the conversation is the same folks that were here for discussion one plus one more. So we're going to reintroduce everyone from discussion one, then we'll move on to our new person, and then we'll continue our conversation. So we'll start with introductions with Rio.
Absolutely. Hey, everyone, or welcome back. I'm Rio Shigeta. I am an actor by training, salesman by trade, dungeon master by choice, and insufferable anime nerd by nature. Happy to be here. And last time I mentioned that my favorite character was Shishia, but I feel like a very close second is Heiya, the girl with the bow and arrow. Just wanted to mention that.
No, it's fantastic. And I suspect she'll come up, particularly if anyone talks about the King of Spades. How about you, Marissa?
Okay, well, hi again. Like I said last time, I'm old man dude's over here daughter, Marissa. I think I just kind of love this show, love kind of everything anime, Asian culture type stuff. So that's why I'm here.
And she's also official BTS Army. I mean, I think that's
apparently that's a point. That's a conversation starter with a lot.
Well, we actually had tickets to go see BTS at Soldier Field, I believe.
Yeah,
before
back
COVID.
2020.
And I was going to get a shirt that said Old Army in Korean. And she warned me I better not because I would get in trouble. We're glad you're here. How about you, Lorraine?
What's up? Hey, I'm Lorran Garrison. I'm a school psychologist out here in San Diego. I'm also the co-founder of a tiny little publishing company called Little Brainstorm. We produce books to support social emotional learning for children, teens. I don't know, some adults might want to be able to pick it up. We do mazes, coloring books, fun things like that. I really believe and support play in education and learning and social emotional growth. So that's me.
You actually have a signed copy of one of your books.
Thank you so much for your support.
Fantastic. I love it. All right. And then joining the crew for this discussion, you couldn't be here last time. Julius, please tell everyone something about, tell them your name and then tell them a little something about who you are and what you do.
Julius, you call me Julius Vladimir or JV. Either one is, it's, I preferred or acceptable. It's totally fine. I've been a blue collar worker most of my adult life. But what I had, my interface in the industry before was I used to make indies. I sold like 2 movies in AFM, and I haven't been able to replicate that since. It's been like a decade plus. I am one of the youngest members of Ray Bradbury's cadre. But my 8 to 6 is I fix tankless water heaters for a living. Is what I currently do now. But Rio and I used to work for the same company he did years ago.
Oh.
in Bloomington, you know the company, really? The farm. You know what I mean? Because in Bloomington, Illinois, there's only several, 4 things, that you primarily do is either work for the university, work for that company, work in a farm, and other things. So
probably at least 20% of the local economy, if not more. So when we did episode 1 or discussion 1, Julius, I asked everyone to tell the audience their favorite character as they introduce themselves. So who is your favorite character of the show?
Probably Usagi. And I guess my bias is because I started with the manga. I would say An. She was like the girl with the shades in the manga.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, those are my favorite characters.
All right, then.
Yeah.
So we won't push that. So what we do here is I gave everyone the opportunity to discuss, 2 or 3 minutes, whatever. Tell us the favorite character, favorite line, scene, episode, whatever, favorite theme. And then the rest of the crew takes that as a starting point for a conversation. So I'm going to begin the discussion tonight with what you all know is my favorite episode, my favorite character. My favorite character is Kuyuma, and favorite game is the King of Clubs, which is Osmosis in English. And the reason, for me, the reason is Kuyuma walks around naked all the time, which on the one hand might seem funny to us, yet at the same time is a complete commitment to the life. There's no covering up, and it's so laden with puns. It's horrible, but it's authentic. And I just have to say, the courage of the actor to sit and have all those shots taken and all the camera work, all the practice. I mean, it was hours, I bet, before they got all the shots exactly the way they wanted them. Well, I mean, one of the things I just really liked about this character was he was a leader of a rock and roll band. And if you're going to be the leader of a rock and roll band and you're going to live that life, you're just persistently managing group vulnerability, right? You're encouraging others to actually take the risk to literally be, quote unquote, or metaphorically be naked on stage. And, I have been a member of a band, been a leader of a small band, and it sucks when it doesn't go well. And it really is vulnerable to the point where one of my sayings in life is do the gig. 5 people, 50 people, do the gig. And you learn things. For example, if you're on stage, it's not your job. It's not the audience's job to give you the benefit of the doubt. If you're on stage, they shouldn't have to ask how you feel at all. You're the one that's filling them with feeling. You're the one that's giving them something to observe and to resonate with. So if you're going to go on stage, it's just risk, because if it doesn't work, you feel bad because it doesn't work. And then if you're the leader, you feel like you failed your crew. So I thought that this was a pretty authentic portrayal of that kind of life. And then the guy's closing line before he dies is the ideal life. And what I loved about that line is that when we think about the ideal life, we don't think about it as being vulnerable and visceral and dirty apartments. We think about it as being clean and no work and easy. And this guy's sense of agency just encompassed everything in his life so much that even in the end, he took responsibility for everything that was gonna happen. And if you're going to manage a group vulnerability, that's what it's like. It can't be about you. It's got to be about managing the group's vulnerability. And so you're looking at this, and then, I'm watching him and him giving his speeches, and I'll admit I loved every one of them. I'll just admit, combat me and find out who you truly are, and combat and figure out how you really feel about life. And then there's a scene at the end where we real that where he's being fooled by others, and you see that what Arisu has done is figured out the hubris of the position. In other words, he is saying the very things to Kuyuma that Kuyuma said to him earlier. You need to learn this. You need to learn this. You need to learn this, because my agency is so robust. I know everything, right? and then he just keeps getting closer to him and closer to him and closer to him until he fools him, and he fools him with his own philosophy. And the guy shakes his hand, and he says, "Man, you're more fucked up than I am." I mean, I just thought there was a moment of clarity there for both of them, where he was willing to die with his team, and it's something that Aris was figuring out. Anyway, and when that moment when Aris tricks him, it felt to me like there was a sort of way of life, a warrior way of life that was being critiqued a little bit, or maybe not being critiqued, but it was more, a guy's filled with all kinds of worldviews and all kinds of positive agency and the kind of stuff that makes him look like a leader. At the same time, hearing it from someone else made him vulnerable to being taken out by that very way of thinking. So anyway, I love the character, everything about that. I've watched it 3 times. And for me, the whole series was worth that episode and a half. So what do you guys think of Kuma and the King of Clubs?
I'm going to jump in here because it's also my favorite episode, and I will have to agree. And one of the points that I think is very important is that I think that character, I think it was the King of Clubs, but anyways, he really embodies what I think is collective, you know, the collective majority.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. And not only that, he also represents the strong, in my opinion, and what my experience have been, the strong core of Japanese culture, right? So, you know, we're looking at it through an American lens. We're looking at it through individualism. We're looking at it, you know, man eats world or world eats the man, you know, however, dog eat dog world. And we're looking at it, you know, and to look at like this character really cares for his team, and that's why he's a good leader. And so I think, you know, in American philosophy, we're like, oh my gosh, you know, why would you do that? Why would you sacrifice the self for the group? And I think he really represents that. And like, I love that philosophy. I mean, it's very Buddhist to me. So I think that relationship and being, you know, raw and real to the world, that also resonates with me because, you know, I'm on the neurodivergent spectrum. I don't know where exactly I land, but, you know, he's like, I'm real, I'm raw, you know, I'm naked. You see me who I am for what I am. You know, there is the game that I want to win and keep my group safe. But, you know, here's the philosophy that I've learned about my life and why being present and being in the now is very important. And I think we often forget that because, you know, we have bills to pay. We got to take the kid to soccer. We got to do all of these things. But what about right here, right now, you know, in this very being, which I thought was so beautiful. It was cheesy, and I know Reddit hates him, but, you know, I really enjoyed that episode, the character. I'm like, you know, the whole rock band thing, I get it. You know, leading where it's not about you, and he was vulnerable. He showed his insecurity that, you know, he couldn't always like support the team. But anyways, yes, I love that episode too. Absolutely, 100%.
Fantastic. Anyone want to react to Lorraine?
Can I like add something?
Yeah, sure.
So I do like him as a character. However, I think the end of that game was purely for like a writing perspective. Like they wanted him to go on that whole monologue because like the whole idea of him completely forgetting that they were in a game and that they could totally just screw him over right then is, I feel like, different than how the rest of the whole game is. Like the whole game, they're being very strategic. They are trying to anticipate every move that they're going to make. And I feel like at the end, him letting Arasu even get that close to him was weird. Because there were so many things that they could do. Like even me, the whole time I was like, oh my God, just grab your hands and go get them. Like it was simple. Like you could have beat them that easily. So the idea that they just kind of, I'm gonna say gave up, was kind of weird. All
the people next to the band members.
Yeah. Or I think his name was Kuma. Like him, I get like they thought they won, so like he's just kind of chilling by the water. But like as them who were trying to anticipate all of their moves, I feel like he would have been on alert when Arasu came to him. Like it was just kind of weird. So the only way that I can make that make sense in my head is that he kind of was over it, like he was done.
I guess
go ahead.
For me, I saw that moment as Arisu using Kuma's strength against him. Kuma's strength is the strength of his conviction, but also it's a double-edged sword. It's his weakness. It was his true belief that he would see, or he saw that Arisu had discovered something about himself, that he had broken out of his current struggle into the next phase, a new understanding of his own life. He truly believed that Arisu came to him with nothing but respect and admiration, and to put out a hand and shake his hand in his last moments, because for Kuma, that's what he wants, is for everyone to break free of their shackles of societal constraints, of an idea of what you're supposed to be as opposed to what you are. And so in a way, he says at the end, how I couldn't understand, how did you lie? And then a second later he's like, oh, you didn't lie. You did discover a new thing, and you did want to shake my hand. It just so happened that your desire to live beyond this game was a little bit stronger, and therefore he used this trickery simultaneously in order to save himself and his players, and his fellow players. Whereas I think that Kuma is the kind of person that is so tied to his philosophy that he runs around naked as a physical manifestation of his freedom. Alice sees this and understands that, like, this is a man that will die for his convictions, whether he knows it or not, because that's paramount, is his philosophy.
And it's also his ego too, right?
Yeah, I got very big narcissism vibes from that whole thing.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Totally. And
originally because I didn't want to offend anybody, but
no, but like for sure what Rio's saying, that he's so tied to his philosophy as his identity, which is great. That's the other thing that I love about that, is that it's so part of his identity that his pride, I think, and agree with Rio, that it was his pride that allowed him to shake the other opponent's hand. And that's his I'm sorry, what?
So I think for me, so like his pride allowed him to shake his hand, but it also hindered him from the ability of realizing that they could screw him over, because he thinks that he was just like top shit.
So I'm gonna go with your narcissism thing a little bit, and I am gonna. I mean, being an American psychologist, not a counselor, but having been in that world, narcissism is one label, and that band is made up of a group of people with individual differences, and his difference. One of the things we saw, like at the beach with the Hatter, right? People followed him and agreed to come there, knowing they were going to have to go and play these games and die in order to be able to stay there. And the minute the charismatic narcissist dies, the system falls apart, because they were all putting their faith in that vision. And that's kind of, I think with this guy, the band knew that they were following him, right? And they know with that dialogue they had at the end before they died, call it poetry, whatever you want, but they recognize, you screwed up, you silly guy. You just couldn't keep your cool until the end, right? And that's the narcissism part, right? Why the hell did he walk off? Like you said, right? Because he's got to be the stoic philosophical type, and he walks off and he loses, right? But I guess what I'm saying is, the thing that you're seeing that we tend to call narcissism, I agree, was there. I look at it in terms not so much of him as an individual, but what that type of being brings to a group and provides a group. And the groups rely on that kind of, in one sense, we call it charisma, right? Often. And that I'm just being descriptive here. I don't have a value for it. It's just what it is. And I do want, if I could quickly, so Lorraine, your comment about collectivism is if we look at it from that frame, he's basically he's a fringe character in Japanese culture in terms of being a rock band guy living in these apartments, but yet he's the most thorough embodiment of the culture, right? And there's almost a bit where his vulnerability is a recognition of a vulnerability of collectivism, right? Because it is vulnerable to individualism. And when he says to artists, man, you're more fucked up than I am, he knows exactly what he's saying. You're destroying this system, right? Now you're doing it to protect your system, you know. But I think your comments about collectivism are very on target, and it made me think, wow, this rock band guy is an amazing embodiment of collectivism, which is not how you would usually think about that sort of thing.
He also embodies sort of the inherent contradiction of collectivism, which is and specifically in the game, it's that he started with all players having the exact same amount of points, right? After all these convoluted rules, player team figured out all these different tactics and why some people have more points, who has others, and what each of them does. Kuma and team clubs, everyone has the same points because we're all equal, we're all worth the same. We don't do anything without everyone agreeing, right? But at the same time, like we're saying, this charismatic character whose philosophy is to break free from the shackles of society in order to express himself, and actually the whole reason why he is the king of clubs, spoiler alert here, is that he was a player originally, and he's someone who chose in a previous iteration of the game to remain here as a citizen now of Borderland in order to continue doing what he does, because this suits his belief of what his existence is supposed to be, right? So it's sort of he has this Hobbesian belief, I guess, that like each individual has a right to express themselves unless under monarchic control, you know, and being forced into it, which I mean is a struggle in itself. So he's just a literal naked walking contradiction of these two ideas, right? That he's saying that we're all equal to the point where he will allow himself and any of his players to sacrifice themselves in order to achieve a goal, because the game is what it is. This is our life. This is our reality. If one of us goes, it was meant to be. And as long as everyone agrees with it, that's what we're doing. Right. But then suddenly, end of the game, he's all about, you know, going to Alice and saying, well, good for you. I'm glad I was able to guide you to the answer that you needed. And that's his blind spot, right? So such a contradiction. But
it's
fun characters are contradictions.
On the one hand, it is a blind spot, and at the same time, it's a necessary aspect of being who he is. It comes directly out of who he is. It comes directly out of the relationships he affords the rest of the members of the team. That team couldn't exist without that if he didn't have that blind spot. And so it's your description of a walking naked contradiction, that's just a description for life for most of us, right? We just tell ourselves story that make us feel whole. And I just love the guy who thought he was being brutally honest still was living in his own story, right? And I love it. By the way, you mentioned something about, you know, him being a former player and choosing to do the King of Clubs game. We haven't talked. Is it maybe we did talk? Did we talk about the King of Diamonds game with the acid? No. That's not the game I'm talking about.
Only in the violence perspective.
No, all right.
The Keynesian beauty contest.
Exactly.
We haven't
the one I meant to mention was the prison game.
I love that game.
Okay, so before we move on, can I say one more thing about the last one? So the liken to the lead character in the King of Clubs makes me also think of cults and that personality.
Yep.
And having personal experience with family members in cults, I just thought that was that interesting duality where, you know, he talked about collectivism, but yet at the same time being, you know, that narcissistic leader, as Marissa was saying, which is totally true. But that's how you, you know, you grab people to come into your cult. So his band was not only a band, but in you know, my view, I was like, oh, this is how cult leaders start. And one of Arisu's buddies, you know, grew up in a cult. So I thought that was very interesting how they address that. So if we want to talk about cults, I'm all about it. But you know, I know that's a different conversation. So, but yes, I mean, it was just very interesting to see that duality. So thank you.
No problem. I mean, that's
fun little tidbit. Chota's background of his mother being in a cult was something that was added in the live action adaptation and was not present in the manga. Yeah.
Interesting. I wonder why.
Yeah, I wonder why. Do you know why, Rio?
The reasoning I have not found, but as far as I know, his character is a little bit interesting. He was sort of comic relief and sort of an outcast, which is a trope in manga for sure. His artwork is so different. He doesn't even look human. He looks like a little like animal friend. And I don't think that they intended to have him have that much depth in terms of a character. I think he was sort of supposed to be a lighter sort of like his whole struggle, I think, was similar to Tata's, actually, in that like he didn't really feel he had a lot of self-worth, and he was really only a person in relation to others, in that like the attention that he could get is the best that he could be, as opposed to having any actual self-worth. And I think that's how he was easily manipulated by the woman whose name I can't remember. But I guess his probably just to give it a little more dimension and depth, because it was kind of so to speak paper thin in the manga version. So maybe to just sort of give us a broader idea of the lives that they live, because they do come back a lot more, I think, in the live action to support Alice's character as well, mentally and psychologically.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was wondering if maybe they did that so we care more about him, so that third episode is more of a shock.
Yeah.
Because if he's just kind of there, we're just gonna be like, all right, cool. But like,
the whole engagement thing.
Yeah.
With Karube and the ring and everything, that didn't exist in the manga. I think they did purposefully give them a little bit more like humanity in order for us to really experience that Botanical Garden episode.
Yeah, for that 7 of Hearts game to just rip us in half. I mean,
the third freaking episode in.
That's my favorite game.
Is it really?
Hey,
yeah, because to me that actually sealed kind of Arisu's esprit de corps. To me, that's like a defining moment to set for someone. I feel like I'm one of those people that my life is defined by like a singular traumatic event. Like kind of like my whole being, like how I base the narrative that I base my life on now. Like, because we're all slaves to narrative, right? There was 2 seminal moments in my life that are traumatic, that I like that. It involved people dying like that. So the thing is, like, that episode resonated to me. After that, I knew, like, when I was reading the manga, like, it was playing for keeps. That this is like a work of art that is like, this guy is Togashi level. And I distinctly thought that the story itself, the way it's written, actually is very distinctly Japanese. Because, like, remember when they had like the level game, the high rise? They had like, he was like, well, are you a wrestler?
I don't know if
and then he's like, no, I'm not. And then he was like, are you a fight guy? And he's like, yeah, but I'm like a military nerd, which in Japanese is like that's a distinct culture, like a gunji ota.
Otaku, right? Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a gunji otaku, it's like a military nerd, right? So it was like, to me, it's distinctly Japanese under the prism of they live in a cosmos of almost like Sethian Gnosticism, where there's like this kind of like over presence of like Yaldabaoth and with his archons, and we're trapped You know what I mean? We're trying to survive. We're trying for transcendence to get out of this samsara, essentially.
So, I mean, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No,
Well, I was just saying that I feel like Alice in Borderland as a whole is sort of this critique of man-made systems and our free will within it, right? And to how to break through, and I guess it sort of made me think of that, and thinking about why Alice in Wonderland was the inspiration, or at least an overarching theme, I guess, because Alice in Wonderland could be interpreted as a critique of Victorian society and of its time, and sort of turning it on its dreamy head. And I hadn't thought of that until just this last sort of watch through and interpretation that I had, that because I'm obsessing on weird details, like who is which character in Alice in Wonderland, just for no other reason than it's fun. But then I was like, why Alice in Wonderland for Alice in Borderland? And I guess that's kind of what you're touching on, JV, is that yes, how much control do we have of ourselves and our lives under the society that we live in, and how, do we even have free will, or is there enough control over us societally, or just beyond in something cosmic that we don't understand, that basically has set forth our paths regardless of what we do?
The reason why I love the show and the manga so much is I have that kind of worldview. Like I believe in Sethian Gnosticism. I think we are like kind of trapped here, and the goal is to get out. And then there's and basically like the phrase is like, the greatest trick the devil ever played is, to say it doesn't exist. To me, the greatest trick that was ever played was that God said that he was God, and that God is actually the devil. That they're one and the same. It's kind of a very Marvel universe type of mentality, where in the Marvel universe, like the one above all and the one below all are the same. God and Satan are like the divine monad, essentially.
Yeah, and Sandman is kind of like that with the Neil Gaiman, and which I love, absolutely love. But I'm grokking what you're saying there, JV, about like trying to get out of that samsara. Like that's interesting to me, because I work with a lot of kids with special needs, and when they perseverate on something, I'm like, they're stuck on something that they can't get out of. And if you take that philosophy in a bigger way, we get stuck on so many things, and it's hard to shift. And that's where a lot of human foibles are, is when we're stuck, right? When we're stuck in that whatever's bothering us, and we can't let go, and we can't shift, because it doesn't align with our values, and it doesn't align with what we hold truth, or rules, or personal boundaries. And so I now that I've learned more about human beings in general, I do that self-reflection. Am I stuck in my own whatever samsara of some sort? So I'm totally grokking what you're saying here, JV.
Most of our phobias come from our memory and our imagination. Memory being the past, and our imagination the future, instead of like now. Like instead of like, okay, I'm gonna meditate.
Guys, I had no idea this conversation would go in this awesome direction. Because one of the things I try to do in my work and my philosophy is, you have a choice, pretty binary choice about how you look at reality. It's either stable things that are in flux, or it's flux and somehow stable things come to be. And most worldviews there are things that are in flux. And you never ask ourselves how stability comes to be. Why am I saying all this? Because all these things you're talking about, we get stuck on. These are stabilities. Every time we have a thought, every time my muscles move this way, these are neural stabilities being generated that are being called out of all the possibilities of what my body can do right now. You mentioned memories. Everything I'm thinking is continuously being primed as expectation from my memory. And those are bubbles we have to create. They're borders we have to create. Otherwise, I can't tell if my thoughts are from me or if they're from someone else, and I get diagnosed as having schizophrenia. So for me, the curse of being is this fact that we necessarily generate boundaries out of what we are, from the single cell to the thought, yet we never experience ourselves creating them. That's why the brain is such a bastard, right? It just creates these things and we have them and we feel like they're real and we feel like we have nothing to do with this cup. That cupness is somehow independent of our own work. And that's why the brain works. But that curse is something that, you know, different cultures have taken a different approach to how to deal with that curse. And the Western world has pretty much said, well, it's just things in motion. And that's why the Western world is very capable of dehumanizing all of reality, right? Because it's just things and we're not of them, right? We're of this transcendent space called God. Whereas you look at more collectivist, more recent philosophies, we are of, in, and about everything. So what we have to do, I don't think they call it trapped. I think they say, how do we deal with suffering in this space? And how do we not cheapen what's here by believing it's better in some non-contingent space? How do we manage helping others with self-respect, and despite the fact we have to eat, destroy, and create borders? Y'all let me go on that, and I appreciate it, but that's the work.
Yeah, you're right. It's not trapped. It's more stuck. That's not a good translation. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
It's funny though, I think, because the entire story of Alice in Borderland actually, I think, starts with what you're saying about Western culture, Scott, in that it is this feeling of wanting to escape from the everyday drudgery of life. But I think the conclusion that they reach is actually, how do you exist within the misery and the joy of life? Yeah, I think that's from beginning to end, the whole arc.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think all the shit that they have to go through to get to that point is Buddha walking out of the cart and seeing the world of suffering, right? But we're taking on 16 hours of moving through this space, because in the end, the choice is this place you live, it's violent, it's horrible. And by the way, Kuma says the same thing. This reality, these games are brutal, they're harsh. Never forget you're in a death match. And when he says that, he's talking to us about life. These are death matches, right? We don't stab people every day, but we eat chickens and kill potatoes and carrots, and we do things that have impacts on people at a distance we never see, right? And we build a bubble for ourselves where somehow that's virtuous. And guys like Kuma just see kind of through it. They get stuck in their own bubble, for sure, the curse of bubbles. But I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lesson here.
He knows that life is the Ouroboros, that it's the snake eating its tail. That's the thing that makes the show so good, because it's like they're literally living in a panopticon. Except like they can go the up levels. It's like a spiral, like coming up, right? They're not stuck in a cell like this, like the central conning tower here.
Just a little side note that is not really relevant to anything other than the fact that there was a Alice in Borderland retry manga that was just a little revisiting of Alice in Borderland. It's horrible. I don't recommend it. I'm sad that it exists. There is, however, Alice on Border Road, which is by the same author, Haru Aso, which I have not read, but I believe the protagonists are two girls that are in a similar world. I think they start in Kyoto, but I don't know where it goes from there. So if you're interested in exploring a little bit more of Alice in Borderland and Aso Haru, who I think is now retiring or retired, that's something to, look into if you like. It's a manga.
So Julius, you got us started talking about episode 3, the game, the Seven of Hearts. I think there's a lot to talk about in that episode. I'll quickly say I watched it again this morning. Actually, last night. I think it was last night. I remember I watched a bunch. What I didn't realize about that episode the first time I watched it is how beautifully the rules, who's chasing who, changes, right? And so it's hide and seek, which means the wolf chases the sheep, right? And then the sheep start chasing the wolf because they realize it's the wolf that has to hide. And you go through all those machinations. And then suddenly the sheep hide, right? Because the wolf, they don't want, the end. Because they don't want anyone else to die. So it's the same rule the whole time. it's just the intentional states of the characters as it closer and closer to death, going through these massive phase transitions and what they're experiencing. And I went, okay, that's just smart. And then, man, the last 3 minutes of that, if you're not crying, Lord have mercy. That's
Yeah, my mouth was just like agape the whole time. I was just like, what?
Yeah. As you said, Julius, they're playing for keeps.
They're playing. Yeah, when I read that in the manga, it was a very visceral reaction, a very similar reaction I had when I read the third Game of Thrones book in 2000 when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
I actually got to hang out with Gur Martin, like in the Queen Mary, because I'm friends with Ray Bradbury's group, and this was like years ago. But I didn't get to ask him, like, because I was about to start end high school at the time, so it was like college, high school. I threw it across the room. That's how pissed off I was when there was like the red wedding, like, because it resonated so much to me, because this was like long before the show. This is like early 2000s, right? Because it came out 2000. I read it around, I think, 02, 03. And I had a similar reaction when I read that in the manga, and then I saw the episode. I think you're right. I don't think you're quite human if you don't have some type of emotion laden when you see those images right in front of you. And the thing that kind of stuck it for me was just how he was able to layer the story, because a trope in maybe not just in manga, maybe in Japanese culture as well, is like the power of friendship, which is like a common theme in shonen battle manga, right?
Yep. Yeah.
To me, the two greatest exemplars of the power of friendship, but it came organically. It didn't feel coerced or plastique, right? It wasn't kitsch. Was Full Metal Alchemist in the end, when he gives up his power, of alchemy, when he was like, well, you know what? I choose to do this anyway because, like, I have to. He's my brother. Like, the price was all the power in the universe. The price was to become God, basically. And he gives that all up because power of friendship, like, and that was that for me. That game was like, that was an organic way of showing that. And it was heartbreaking. It was like soul crushing, because like the price of survival was like, he lost his only reason to live, essentially, which were those people. Right.
Yeah.
I can identify with that because I went through that kind of trauma. I went through that kind of violence, and like it happened twice in my life. And it's been my central narrative. Like, so when I saw that episode, I was just like, man, this guy speaks to me. He knows my soul.
Wow.
He knows my soul. He's just an incredible writer.
And can we just shout out to the actor?
Oh, yeah.
Just the snot running out of his nose. Just the, and I'm sorry if this sounds too crafty, but how many takes did they have to do? Can you imagine how much energy that guy exuded just doing one take of that scene? I suspect they didn't do too many.
It was exhausting to watch.
Yeah.
It was exhausting to watch.
I stopped watching for like a day and a half because I was like, I can't. Yeah, it was a lot. Actually, for that, I was actually in the beginning, so before you watch the whole show, I was actually confused that Arasu let that happen. I was surprised that he let his friends die instead of himself, because at least in the beginning I kind of associated him with like doing everything he could do to save his friends type thing, but there was a little bit of let me bear that burden kind of thing at the end, where it was like, I don't want you guys to have to go through watching your friends die, so like let me do it. Which goes on, I think, throughout the whole show of him kind of thinking about that. But in the beginning, I was really confused as to why he did that. I understand.
When he first escaped, when he first runs away from his friends and he's crouching on the bridge, and the one friend is actually seeking him to become the wolf, right? And he's not getting up saying, here I am. So I took that to be, he was in a moment of self-survival.
Yeah.
And it's like, damn, that's some pretty honest writing, man. I mean, they had to go through all those different emotional cascades to get to that last scene. So somebody knows something about life or death, struggling, and what I'll call the phenomenology of death, right? The feeling of getting close to death, which is something we don't talk about nearly enough as a culture, because I've never been in that spot yet. I feel I would go through all of those emotional transformations as that happened. And so you're right, he didn't get up, and you're thinking, what's going on? And then it comes full force, and
yeah,
that's amazing.
It's also very like un-American. I feel like if I were to see an American like show have that kind of ending, like his friends would be mad. Like they'd be mad at him the whole time, and they're like, why are you doing this to me, and all this kind of stuff. But in Alice in Borderland, they were just like, all right, like I've made my peace, like I can't find you, like let me just live this last minute and smoke my cigarette. Like that was very un-American. And I loved it.
And this is where the show changed for me, and where, I mean, like I had to fast forward to some of the violent stuff because I couldn't stand it. But this is where the show, like, you know, first episode I loved, second episode I was like, third episode I was like, okay, you grabbed me in this again, because I love how the beginning of the show started with this, you know, very American, like individualistic, and how his friends got mad at him. And you see this arc, and then they're like, no, that's not who I am. You know, this is my value. My value is to love my friends. I can't live without my friends. I can't, you know, and you see these flashbacks, and I'm like, yeah, you know, now we're going back to that Asian philosophy of that collectivism. I can't say the word. I'll figure it out one day. I'll figure it out. But anyways, but you know, that the whole entire community. And, you know, when I support, you know, special needs parents, special needs kids, you know, I have to take into account where that family comes from, where that family's background is, and what is their value and their meaning. And so how do I talk to them, and how do I tell them, you know, their child is disabled, and you don't have, you know, your normal child that you're thinking of anymore. Your child's still the same child, but now he, you know, has these other layers to him. And I loved that in that third episode where we see a little bit more in depth of the characters. And so I'm so glad that, you know, we got to see Chota, you know, like with the ring and stuff like that. I mean, like I was so invested in, you know, it was Chota, right? I'm getting the names.
Karube was the one with
Karube. Yeah. It was Karube. I was so invested in his two friends, you know, Chota with the whole, you know, arc of the, you know, the cult stuff. And then Karube. Oh my God. I was like, you know, he was, you know, I grew up with those guys, you know, that worked in the bar, you know, the whole thing. Like I knew that guy, you know, and so like, I'm sure JV, I'm so sorry, whatever happened to you, but I get that, you know, like that, you know, that crush, that, you know, how, you know, that's your hero arc, right? Yeah. So I get that 100%. And that's, you know, the other philosophy I believe in is that whole Joseph Campbell, what's your story, and the Dan Harmon, you know, circle and stuff like that. I get that. Like, and so, you know, I got sucked in again into, I was like, I don't know about this show, but okay, episode 3.
Yeah.
I want to touch upon what Marissa said, is that I think you're right. If this was like an American show, you're right, Marissa, and go into what Lorran is saying. The reaction of the American viewers would be different. It's like, why would you be doing this to me, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with what Scott said about our approach to death, because in this culture, we barely address it. And also not even just the approach to death, but how you view the afterlife is in kind of a Western context of like a set finite type of rule. The afterlife is seen as an eternal vacation for the I or me, like an eternal palace for the I or me, servicing me, right? Where a more Eastern or animist concept, or even indigenous or nativist concept, is like when you pass away, it is a cycle. Because the thing is, you can get to come back. It's not an eternal palace for me. It's always in a constant state of flux. You can get stuck. You could like get reincarnated, right? And I think that's the reason why the 60s was to me like kind of like a failure to like awaken mass consciousness. Because the thing is, when Leary and all those guys gave basically these things that brought you to the numinous and the liminal, we didn't have wisdom traditions to be able to tackle that. So the
Jim
thing is, like,
Morrison was not a shaman.
no,
All right. He was not a shaman in any way. Break on through to the other side by yourself at a party with people who don't know anything about how to manage this as a spiritual event. You're absolutely right.
and take it from me, to someone that has been in the numinous and liminal, because I've been in the forest and taken those brews,
Yeah.
right? With transcendence, sometimes the price you pay is you lose a little bit of your humanity.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
to me, like, what some of, like, the mass killers are, like some of the serial killers, is basically a traveler or a shaman that didn't come back. They confuse, like, what should be an internal process,
Right.
and they try to externalize it because they were traumatized by that event.
Mm.
That's why they chop bodies. That's why they do just commit violence, because those are the kind of things you see.
Yeah.
You do go to Dante's Hell. Like, people think it's Sunshine and Rivers,
Yes.
oh, peace and loving or whatnot.
No.
I
No.
have been in trips that are like Alice in Borderland. Like, I was stuck in that kind of realm, and it felt as real as, like, you and I talking. This place feels fake. Like, this feels like not that felt like the base reality, and this is kind of like less real. And the thing is, I think that show touches on that. And I think when he was friends with her about to die, that's why their reactions were that way, because it's more of a culture that is kind of a little bit more comfortable with death, in a sense that they address it actively, right? That there is some type of wisdom tradition that addresses, like, the transcendent part of that next phase of life, which is dying, right? And we lack that. I'm not on the tune in, turn on, and drop out. I think Leary made a mistake, and some of those guys did. They should have approached it more like John C. Lilly did, because there's no wisdom tradition in the Western culture.
They didn't know, man. They were suburban kids raised in an individualist culture. They had no wisdom traditions. Their generations were split against each other. There was no, the only scale of life beyond now was your own old age or some place called eternity. There was no continuum of time that you lived in. There was no continuum of reality that you were part of, except for a sort of stranded soul, right? That somehow had to survive this world of contingency to get to eternity. And that view is so utterly juxtaposed to the way 80% of the world lives. 80% of the world lives in what I'll call indigenous ontology, which is that we are of, in, and about everything, right? Almost more of, I would say, a cosmic sort of ontology. And I would, we can talk about this another time if you want, but I would say that a lot of the things that we're challenged by in Western culture are the results of our own adopted worldview. And there's one thing I want to just quickly get out about collectivism, and then if I'm interrupting someone, I apologize. I got to watch a wonderful talk by a developmental psychologist in my department talking about developmental psychology in Korean culture. And in Korean culture, the 8-year-old boys go to the bathrooms at school with the 5-year-old boys and hold them up at the urinal while they urinate.
Cute.
Now, on the one, can you imagine that ever happening in the United States?
No, we didn't.
That will never happen here. But what happens to you as a human being when you do that every day? Then you are no longer, an isolated soul trapped. You are part of something bigger. And the codependencies, which a word we don't like in the US, right? But the codependencies are amplified. And it becomes a very irreducible aspect of how you experience yourself. So those practices you talked about, Larry didn't know, hell, they had no clue what they were doing. And they didn't know the danger they were putting themselves in, because look, I've never tripped and I won't ever trip unless there's someone there with me who refuses to tape everything they see. Because I suspect if I tripped, it would be Alice in Borderland on crack. I would just see and feel things that all of my worst fears would come alive. I would need someone there to make sure I didn't bite my tongue. And I mean, I'm just saying, I would need someone there to make sure.
But that's what the elder is for, and the community is for, the shaman, right?
Yes.
Which we're clearly lacking. God, I love this show. I love Arakawa and Aso. They're just geniuses, man.
And going kind of back to, you know, those who were sort of lost in the liminal space, or guys that didn't come back, I kind of want to point at the prison game. And the characters, the two characters who decided to stay in Borderland, and as if you don't know now, you know they are the Jabberwocky and the Bandersnatch.
Yeah. Right.
Those are the two, and I can't recall in the show, but I do remember in the manga that Banda started out as a serial killer. And then came to Borderland and remained more or less as such.
Yeah.
Whereas, what is his name? That represents the Jabberwocky, the businessman, the master manipulator guy. He's one that goes in basically having achieved everything that he wants, and he's sort of this like ambition monster, right? Now I can rule this new thing.
And this is the only world worthy of my control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about narcissism there.
Yeah, right.
I
that,
mean,
you know, that's like, you know, the, you know, sociopath right there, the psychopath right there.
Well, they both are.
They are.
Oh, yes.
That's just brilliant.
All of these games are little sort of ethical, philosophical microcosms, right? That we can observe human interaction and thought and existence. In the manga, the prison game doesn't involve any of the main characters. It's a complete side story.
Right.
So Chishiya isn't even there. I'm glad that he was in the show, and it gives it a better narrative arc and connection. But that game is just us watching these characters under a microscope, like watching a psych experiment, like the Stanford Prison experiment, but with different rules, right? Yeah. So I just wanted to kind of point out, like, at the end, you know, they're given the choice: do you wish to stay or do you wish to go? And I think they're the only two that at least as far as we know, stay.
I think so. And that totally makes sense. That
totally makes sense.
Yeah, I do like the comparison between them, because like the whole time they're kind of the only two people, minus that crazy girl who like gives you kind of like an ick. You're just like, ew, like I don't trust like anything that you're saying, like everything about like their presence is just like gross. And I kind of like the idea that they put like an actual like murderer and just kind of like this white collar man at at the same level, because I think in America like that makes so much sense.
Our culture has, over the past, well, maybe 200 years collectively, but for sure in the last 50, culturally selected sociopathy as a leadership trait.
Yeah.
As we've industrialized, as you can actually influence the lives of you can destroy the lives of people you've never seen by making a phone call and closing a factory. The best depiction of this guy's ever is HBO's, the Western from 2003, Deadwood. HBO's Deadwood from 2003 is the story of American sociopathy. American sociopathy isn't the person with the knife. American sociopathy is the person with the suit and the telephone who can ruin your life now from a distance. And that trait has been selected because you can only make those calls if you're ruthlessly non-empathetic, right? That's what Michael Douglas's Greed was all about, right? And that's why the William Gere character decides not to goes in partnership with the boat manufacturing place and says, let's build ships, because that was a 1980s understanding of the edge we were at. I mean, we're still there, you know, but no, when I watched it the second time, I said, that is so cool. Now, I don't know if that was written, and I will I took that as being a comment on the United States.
Mm.
But as I double take, it could also be a comment or an expression of attention in Japanese culture. Where do we go? Because as we industrialize, as this kind of person gains more and more power in our culture, are we making ourselves vulnerable to the sociopathy or the type of sociopathy we see going on in that culture? So anyway, I'm glad you brought up that game. I love the two of them choosing to stay. And
yeah. That's actually my favorite game too. So
yeah.
It
is the
would be heaven
breakdown
for
of
them.
collectivism, right? That whole game, it's based on trusting another person to have your best interests in mind. And I mean, the manga anime part of it is that it's filled with manipulative characters, all in different ways. You have master salesmen, and you have social manipulators, and then you have the actual I think it's the Jack of Diamonds, who is the runner of the whole game, is one of the least interesting until the very end.
Yeah.
He came up with this thing supposedly to be the master and puppet master of all of this. In the manga, he's like a what's it called when you have the swinging pendulum and you put people in trances. What's that?
Oh, hypnotist.
A hypnotist. Yeah. He's and he hypnotizes whatever the lady is that's with the Jabberwocky character until the end. This one I think is a little bit more interesting in that he has like a tactic with the cookies and showing how. But I did not realize until you said something that maybe it is a critique of Western culture, maybe even specifically the United States, in terms of like the types of power structure that are built within this and within a prison of all places, and then how each of those break down from the very beginning with just base violence and power structures of I beat you up until you tell me, until I have power because I am entitled to power and I have power because all of you are beneath me in genetically,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the point of that female character that Marissa mentioned, what I liked about that character being there is, oh, you think that's sociopathy? That's not sociopathy. Just wait. We're going to show you what that truly is. It's going to take a few more rounds of the game, right? But I absolutely love it.
No, I really like that game for like a whole bunch of reasons. One, everybody sucks. Like everyone is just horrible. Nobody is like, there's no collectivism in that game at all. It's just like self-survival, and it's just like, nah, screw all you. Like, I'm gonna do what I gotta do. So I think that's awesome. Two, I don't know if I talked about it last time, but it was the first game after episode 3 in season 1 where you actually are like rooting for people the whole time, because you're kind of in the dark. You're in the dark the whole time, and you're also guessing. So it's like, I think the only game that kind of piques my like curiosity, because the other ones are like physical games, or like you don't see the whole game, or it's like way too over my head. Like the beauty contest.
Yeah,
like that was way too above my but I really liked that the whole time you're just trying to figure out who it is. You're like, oh, that person's gonna screw you over, because the only person for sure wasn't doing anything was Cheshire, because like they want you to be at his kind of POV, but I don't know. The whole time I was just like, oh, okay, it's gonna be that person, or like these people need to like grow up a little bit and just like take some charge. But it was very clear, and I think it happens throughout the whole kind of series differently in each game, but it kind of shows how different people can react to a certain situation. So this one, it was very clearly life or death, more so than other ones, because like you're completely in the dark. You're just in your own head. Like that's all you have is you. So you can see like the murderer who's just kind of like taken over this passive guy. You can see the businessman with his passive girlfriend. Like, you can see this really aggressive female bullying this other group of passive people. Like it, and then you have Chishiya, which is kind of both. Like he's kind of passive, but like also like strategically aggressive. And I think it was cool to kind of see all those different personalities in one game.
Oh yeah.
So Chishiya takes the place of a couple characters, I think, in the adaptation process. In the manga, you do have two characters that you clearly are supposed to relate with and feel are the heroes that you want to get through. And I believe one of them is a detective, and the person that he befriends is a queer nightclub owner. And I feel like, and now I'm on this, that seems like a very Japanese interpretation of the good guys in America, if that makes sense. Like who's supposed to, you know, get through. Like I think they're still, at least at the point that this was written, like cops are the good guys that like they maintain order, and at least the detectives are the ones that are solving crimes and helping people. And then, you know, as a progressive country and inclusive, the nightlife also in that idea, progressing culture and acceptance, these are the two that you sort of hope are going to go through. Of course, in the live action, Chishiya has to survive. But then again, in this show, you're not sure until he does. But in the game, they do not survive to the end. It is, I think it ends the same way though, with Oki and Banda torturing the Jack of Diamonds until he submits. Yeah. So in the manga, he has like a mechanical eye that actually tells him what his symbol is the whole time. It's kind of dumb, and I believe they took that out because it's not great.
Well, it's time to bring part 2 of our discussion to a close. I want to thank all my guests for being here. Please feel free to tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we'll start on my screen with Rio.
Absolutely. So full name Rio Shigeta. You can find me on Instagram or Twitter, probably at I Know Rio. Maybe if you search a little deeper, you'll find other things, but that's my game for you.
There you go. Dun, 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 dun. How about you, Marissa?
I don't got anything yet, guys. Maybe if I keep getting invited on these podcasts, I'll make a professional account. So there you go.
Thanks.
But here I am.
That's all good. How about you, Lorraine?
Hi, my name is Lorran Garrison. Once again, I'm a school psychologist out here in San Diego. You can find me at www.littlebrainstorm.com, where we talk about social emotional learning for, kids, teenagers, all that fun stuff. Hope to see you there.
No, fantastic. And how about you, Julius?
I haven't posted in a while, but you can find me on YouTube, www.youtube.com/Karsu. You could also type in the search function Karasu for like crow. And it has some of my old interviews with like physics professors and the like, and I haven't updated in years.
No, that's fantastic. You can find all episodes of Why Is This So Good on YouTube with the Dark Loops Productions channel. You can also type Dark Loops Productions into the Google machine. It'll take you to where all the podcasts are, because we produce audio versions of these as well. So there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and remember, hope prevails.
Hope prevails.
Bye-bye.
Thank you guys. So much.